Okay, today we're going to talk about children who are identified as gifted and talented. What we should know is even though this is a low incidence, um, I don't know that we can call it a disability, a low incidence population, um, we it is a population that is not really served under federal law or served very, very minimally. And some states choose to provide services to children who are gifted and talented. Um, the big thing is there's not really funding attached to serve these children. So it's problematic in that there are certainly children who need gifted and talented services, but that don't really receive as much as they need. I should say that since I reside in Pennsylvania, and most of you do, that Pennsylvania is a state that provides a GIEP, Gifted Individualized Education Plan, for children who are identified as gifted and talented. So, the development of the field, it really, in terms of disability, it's a newer field, but we have a person by the name of Terman who's most connected to IQ testing, but beginning longitudinal studies of gifted children way back in the early 1900s. And those studies are continuing. But we became very concerned with supporting children who are gifted and talented once the Soviets beat us to space. So, with the launching of Sputnik, we became concerned with the fact that maybe we don't have enough children and adults who have the skills to do what we believed in the United States we need to do to stay in competition with other countries. In 1972, we do get a disturbing report, though referred to as the Marland Report, that indicates we're really not doing much of anything for children who are gifted and talented. In fact, these are children who can suffer as a result of that. And so that's a landmark report. In 1988, we do get some funding through the Jacob K. Javits Gifted and Talented Students Education Act. So we do get some funding and support there. In 1990s, we do get some federal support, but the emphasis, which is a good thing, is at serving disadvantaged students who maybe not have been identified as gifted and talented. And in 1990, so you see this is a relatively new field, but we get a national research center on the gifted and talented. And we have, in the 21st century, we're looking at primarily collaborative models of service being delivered primarily in the general education setting. So, what is the definition of gifted and talented? And this is from the Marland Report. These are children who are identified at the preschool, elementary, or secondary level as possessing demonstrated or potential abilities that give evidence of high performance capability in intellectual, creative, specific academic, or leadership ability, are in the performing and visual arts, and who are by reason thereof require services or activities that are not ordinarily provided by the school. Primarily, we're talking about in Pennsylvania enrichment and or acceleration. One of the most important, I'd say, professors, he's right out of New Jersey, also researchers, writers, is a person by the name of Renzulli. And Renzulli gave us this model to take a look at. So, this model of giftedness. But what we're really thinking about and looking at when we look at children who are gifted is the above average intelligence. So, if we think back to that bell shaped curve, we're talking about the 2% of the population which are at least 4 standard deviations above the mean. And we're talking about children who are creative and talented and are really, really persevere when it comes to their tasks. However, we also get Howard Gardner's work later on in the 1990s, who said, there's really more types of intelligence we need to consider. However, I would suggest that at this point, most districts are sticking with Renzulli's model, looking at gifted in terms of IQ, academic achievement, perseverance in terms of task performance, as well as creativity. But Gardner gives us these 9 types of intelligence that as teachers we really need to consider. And those are movement, bodily, kinesthetic, interpersonal, verbal, linguistic, logical, mathematics, naturalistic, interpersonal, visual, spatial, and musical. So, in terms of gifted and talented, even though we have the IQ and we know that we're talking about IQ above the mean, way above the mean, we don't really have a good handle on the prevalence of children who are identified or actually should be identified. We do know that minority groups are significantly underrepresented in gifted programs, and girls are also underrepresented. So, what are the cognitive characteristics? Well, these are children who have the ability to manipulate abstract symbol systems, power of concentration and perseverance, usually very well developed memory. They have early language interest and development. They're curious. There's preference for independent work, though, so that's important to remember as teachers. And they might have multiple interests or a sustained interest that's really goal driven. Um, we also, all of these children are different, so we have to remember that as well. We could be gifted in one subject and not another. Social and emotional characteristics may include a strong sense of justice, sense of humor potentially, very intense children, emotionally sensitive children, strong attachments and commitments to things. And this could be a strength. This also could be an area of great need. For example, the sensitive part, seeing injustices, really could be quite problematic for some children who are identified as gifted and talented. Um, they can be altruistic, idealistic. Perfectionism could be a big problem, particularly because we know as human beings it's impossible to be perfect. And they may have high levels of energy, and they have aesthetic sensitivity potentially. So, how do we assess children who may be identified as gifted and talented? Well, there's two-stage assessment process. We have to measure to match programs of typically developing and then see about moving beyond that. We have to make sure we're looking at all of the academic domains. High ability alone is not necessarily giftedness, so we have to remember that. So you can have very high ability but not be giftedness. And there is some professional judgment involved, as there is in all of these categories of disability. But this two-stage process really will be looking at IQ, we'll be looking at achievement, academic achievement. We do need to look at authentic assessments. All right, so what exactly are gifted and talented children producing? And ongoing identification of learning needs and abilities. We're going to need to measure all areas and all domains. So, in terms of eligibility, a little bit different. We don't have those questions to ask about this group that we've had with the other categories, but the specific process will vary across the states and across districts within states. So, even though in Pennsylvania we do have some guidance, um, eligibility may look different even across districts. Usually, a school level eligibility committee will form a rubric or some kind of checklist that will um, talk about the assessments they need to do and what will result, what outcome will result in the child being labeled gifted and or talented. And of course, a student profile is always reviewed. So, how are these children educated? Well, there's a number of different models. In some children will be grouped by ability or within their classes, out of their classes. They might have a part-time separate class at least once a day. There are potentially some special schools, homeschooling, charter schooling, cyber charter schooling, but a lot of these children are included within the general education setting. So children who are gifted and talented, certainly could have, they're going to have strengths and they're going to have limitations. And we need to remember that there's a strong uh, population of children who we see characteristics of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We also know there's a higher rate of problems going so far as suicide attempts among gifted populations. And so we have to make understand the challenges they're going to face, and so to own their abilities and to use put them to good use, know how to do that. To make sure they understand that there might be some cognitive dissonance, and meaning that separation of what they know and what they're actually doing and what they actually are motivated to do. Competing expectations. They might have too much on their plate. They might be impatient with others because I'm picking up very, very quickly, but I'm around people who, just don't get it as quickly as I do. They also may have some identity issues. What are the recommended educational practices? Curriculum compacting is one, meaning that we don't teach the whole curriculum for the child because perhaps they could fly through most of it, but we compact it and we teach to what they need to learn. Acceleration might include acceleration a whole grade or two. It might be acceleration in one or more subjects. We might be enriching the subjects. Certainly differentiation strategies within the classroom, and interventions might be needed for underrepresented or overrepresented diverse populations. Working with parents, we want to make sure that they understand their child's needs in terms of the schooling, but that we also are supporting to validate what they probably are already doing, such as reading to their child, but also talk about that. What are some good things to go to the library and pick up? What are some enrichment puzzles, games? Um, what can they do in their community to work with their child? The trends and issues within this population, certainly talent development. If the child does not have resources, such as the financial means for lessons, how can we support the family? Identifying programming for underrepresented groups. Really, a trend is looking at children who have more than one label or diagnosis, so twice exceptional. Effective differentiation within the classroom, and alternative program models. And that takes us through chapter 15.